Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Tuesday, February 18th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you, getting back into our team preview series. The focus for this episode will be the NL Central, America's division, as I like to call it. Eno, how'd the extra day off treat you? I saw a little Pliny the Younger photo from you in our Discord.
Yeah, it was my 17th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we went out to a nice bite to eat, and then we went back to my local, which has been a bar that we've gone to for, I don't even want to say the number.
Has it been there for 17 years?
Huh?
Your bar's been there for 17 years, right?
Yeah, but we've been together for longer than that.
Yeah.
So we've been going there for a long time since school, and we went and played darts, and there was no line. There was no hubbub about about Pliny the Younger. It just happened to be on tap, and I was like, okay, that's fun. So that was fun. I took my dad out to Point Reyes, and so we did a nice hike on Saturday where it was like high 50s, not even that windy, super sunny, beautiful day out there. And what I love about the Bay Area is that like it was like an hour drive to an awesome hike that was just beautiful. All sorts of birds everywhere, and the surf. I love the sound of the surf. It's super important to me. I don't know, from when I was born in Jamaica, so like I don't know, the sound of surf is like my body's like
You're wired for it, yeah.
Yeah, so that was good. We had a little bit of a rude awakening today with breakfast, because so we keep our oil in old milk containers, like we need to put the oil somewhere, so we have old milk containers or old yogurt or whatever. We'll just put the old oil in there. And the cleaners came on Monday, and they put the milk canister back into the fridge.
Ooh.
And today, my youngest son was serving himself cereal and it was the last of the crunch berries.
Oh, no.
And he poured oil all over it and was very upset. And it was a very upsetting moment, and I felt bad for him. We tried to make it better, but
accidentalpranks.com.
Yeah, a rude. I mean, it's Tuesday. It was a rude Monday morning experience.
Not the way you want to start your week after the long weekend, but it sounds like you had a good one. God, the weather was nice for you. We're not getting great weather here, so enjoy what you can if you're in a warmer part of the country. Join the Discord. You can find pictures of the beers that Eno drinks. You can have conversations about the teams that you root for, fantasy strategy, all sorts of good stuff in there. We'll get those Hive Mind rankings out later this week. So if you haven't submitted your Hive Mind positional rankings, go to the Hive Mind rankings channel, drop those in. We'll get those compiled in the next couple of days. All right, let's get to it. Let's start at the top of the NL Central. We go by standings order from the previous season. So we begin with the Brewers. I don't make the rules. No, actually, I do make the rules in this particular instance, but that's how the whole series has been. The big question with the Brewers, I think, is can they beat their projections again? They were a pleasant surprise for a lot of people last year. The expectation after trading away Corbin Burns, losing Craig Counsell, all those things that were swirling around this team was that they would take a step back, and they didn't. They won the division comfortably, and a lot went right for that to happen. But even some things went wrong that have carried over into 2025 a little bit. The status of Christian Yelich looks like it's heading in the right direction in the early days of spring training as he's recovering from the microdiscectomy surgery that he had last summer. But you still have a lot of questions. You look at who's in and who's out on this roster. Not much in terms of position players. I mean, lose Willy Adames in free agency, which was a likely loss, I think, going into the offseason. And you really only have Caleb Durbin coming back as part of a trade that landed them Nestor Cortez. So the position player group is a lot of holdovers and one pretty big pair of shoes to fill. I imagine some of their internal projection is we should have a healthy Yelich all year, which could make a dent in some of what they lost from Willy Adames. But I think a lot of people looking at this team are going to have to say, where else does that extra production come from? Who else steps up? Is that another step forward from Jackson Chourio? Is it someone in the infield mix taking another leap. Like, what do you think about this core group of position players?
Yeah, I don't know if you're going to put the batting projections up, but if you're going to do a rule of 5 on this team, I think you've got Churio, Contreras, Hoskins. Maybe I don't know if he's in. Maybe he's a right-hander, right?
Yeah, he's a righty. Could lose sometime against same-handed pitching.
He's in the rule of 5, and then Christian Yelich is in the rule of 5. So that's 4, and that's why I think that there's such a huge burden on Joey Ortiz and Garrett Mitchell, because I think between the two of them, one of them has to step forward and be in the rule of 5. Now, Turang could be in there just for his defense and passable offense, and so maybe he's really in there. But I think the true meaning of the rule of 5 is these are 5 bats you want in the lineup every day. And I think Turang is who he is. He's a good role player and a good guy to have in the bottom third of your order, maybe even, get on base. But you really want Ortiz or Mitchell to step forward and make this a whole lineup rather than having to have Turang basically in the rule of 5. So I think there's a lot on Ortiz, and there's a lot of promise for him because he makes good contact and a decent walk rate, good glove, a lot of things in place. But we saw a bit of an uneven season from him last year.
Yeah, so one thing that happened that may have been missed if you didn't follow this team closely or didn't have Joey Ortiz on your teams is he had a collision with a tarp in late June. And we're looking at his strikeout rate before and after the collision, and there's a pretty big spike there. So you wonder if in the second half, if he just was not feeling right physically, and swing and miss really isn't a big part of his game. When you look back at Joey Ortiz as a prospect, he seems like a guy that should control the strike zone pretty well, at least get to occasional power and even steal some bases. And aside from that, he can play really good defense on the left side of the infield. So there's a lot of ways for it to work for him. I think you can tell yourself a story that what he was doing before that collision was the next logical step forward for him as someone that was trying to break into the big leagues in Baltimore and was really finally getting his first extended run as a regular during the first half of the season with the Brewers.
Yeah, you can see from this chart that his strikeout rate was way higher, more like 25% in the second half. He's never really run those. And then you can also see from his bat speed that there was something going on, because in April and May, he had a 74.4 mile an hour bat speed, which is important for a couple reasons. That's actually near elite. That's really, really good bat speed. And we're going to show this chart later, but the Brewers are not actually good at bat speed. That is not one of their, okay, well, here it is. They're 14th in the league last year in bat speed. And you can see that, their barrel rate was bottom third, their hard hit and blast rate was bottom third. They're really good at not swinging and chasing. They're one of the most patient teams in the big leagues, along with the Yankees and Dodgers. So that's what the Brewers do well. But they would probably do a better job on offense if they combined that not chasing with better bat speed and with some more power. And the one guy that I have really circled here is Ortiz. 74.4 miles an hour in April and May to 71.8 in August and September. I mean, he lost more than 2.5 ticks of bat speed. And, in terms of bat blast, he went from 13% blast to 7.7. Competitive swings, even. He was at 93.7 competitive swings and went to 87.7. So he just wasn't competitive the same way in the second half. And I wouldn't be surprised if injury was a part of that.
Yeah, that's the impression I'm under, is that it was really a physical problem more than anything else. Projections have him as about a 20% K rate hitter this year. This is from the Bat X, by the way. I'd be surprised if he clocked in with a 92 WRC plus when it was all said and done. I think he ends up being a much more important part of this roster in 2025 than he was in 2024. And I guess just generally speaking, there are several teams that are built in this mold where they need some either combined spots to exceed expectations in a platoon, or young players who are slightly under projected to exceed projections. You're trying to find the rubric of why do some teams beat projections consistently. I do think they still have a group of players that you can kind of pick and choose 1, 2, 3 that you actually like and say, yeah, these guys are probably a little better than what the numbers on the screen are trying to tell you. Sal Frelick has beefed up. Saw that as one of the reports from the Brewers beat. Looks a lot more solid. So we'll see if he's able to turn into an 8 to 10 homer guy with speed and great contact skills. Mitchell, we talked about on our outfield preview. He's been hurt so much during his time in the organization that I think there are still a lot of questions, even for people that watch him all the time, of what his true talent level is. He's shown an interesting combination of power and speed. We know he's yet another great center field defender they have at their disposal. Maybe it's more in a big side platoon because of the other options they have. But you can also look at Garrett Mitchell and say he could be like a Josh Lowe type player for them offensively. And if you don't play him against lefties, you're only getting the best of Mitchell, and then you're getting a matchup you like on the days that he doesn't start, right? So you do that a couple of times, suddenly you're a team that maybe exceeds because you match really well with your depth.
Yeah, I think with his kind of projections, it's a little bit unlikely that he enters into the rule of 5, just because, yes, his projections are mostly good. The BATX does not like him, gives him an 89 WRC plus, but everybody else is around league average. If he's around league average, then he might platoon, because that means he's below league average against lefties. And so he would have to, I think, put together a really good improvement in his strikeout rate in order to kind of become rule of 5. But I do see some hope in his monthly splits and his rolling graphs, because he was striking out 45% of the time in the middle of the season last year, and by rolling graphs, and he was seeing more sliders than he'd ever seen in his life. And the reason I'm hopeful is a little bit like that Lawrence Butler chart, where he then got the strikeout rate back down to 28%, and they stopped throwing him as many sliders. So he found something against sliders, and that's what he's going to have to keep doing to stay ahead of his natural swing and miss, is kind of figure out what pitchers are trying to do to him, figure out different swings and different attacks to, different ways to attack the pitchers that he can get back at them. So I are you generally upbeat about him?
Yeah, I am. I think there's enough ways for him to be good where, on this team, there's plenty of playing time. I think they can use him to kind of optimize the per game efficiency. And maybe there's still a chance he's still young enough to improve against same-handed pitching. So it's not a lock to be a platoon forever, but it's at least a good fit on the roster as it's constructed. I think part of what also gives them more options with how they handle different spots is having someone like William Contreras that you play a ton between catcher and DH. Most catchers don't eat up that much playing time, but you put a catcher into that core 5, and suddenly you can mess around with one more spot. So that's a little bit unique about this team too. The Jackson Chourio projections are also, I think, a tad lighter than what we saw over the final 2/3 of the season, right? For a guy that from June 1st on hit 16 homers, stole 15 bases, hit 303 with a 358 OBP, that's 30 points above the slash line projections, 270 and 321 from the BATX, and it's more power and a little more speed. So there's also the potential rising superstar that could just get to that 6 or 7 WAR level too. They have that also as part of the core right now.
Yeah, and to balance it, I think just an absolute pain point at third base. And, I would be more sort of harping on it, negative about it, except right now I'm doing a comparison of the Mets and Yankees, because there were some dueling barbs between Soto and Judge this weekend about which team is in a better place to win. And they both have similar pain points. What do you think of the Yankees' third base situation? And what do you think of the Mets center field situation? So I would assume that if I looked around almost every team, maybe not the Dodgers because they're so good, but almost every team has a position like the Brewers have at third base, where they're just saying, well, shrug emoji, somebody, anybody step forward. I don't know who it's going to be, because I and I think I share your derision for Oliver Dunn.
That's not fair to Oliver.
I don't think Caleb Durham is very good myself. I think Monasterio is a backup, honestly.
Yep.
And I think Tyler Black is probably stretched defensively at third. And I just don't know that. Is it Brock Wilken is ready? I mean, he was okay at Double-A last year with a 105 WRC plus at 22. That's about the same age average. Like Double-A is around 22 years old, so you don't give him any bonuses for being young. So he was basically just around league average at Double-A last year. Maybe he's the guy that steps forward, but I don't really have any kind of batted ball data in front of me to tell me, if he has good swing speed, if he is, hitting the ball hard. So I'm just looking at a guy who strikes out a lot and has middling power rates for that strikeout rate. So I don't know that I have a champion at third. I'd love to say this is a big position battle and I can tell you who's going to win it. I have no idea.
They tried some Sal Frelick at third base in spring training last year. We'll see if they dabble in that again during the spring or not. But that's probably the positional question, because I think the assumption at the last conversation Pat Murphy had publicly anyway was just that there might be a preference to keep Turang at second, where he's an elite defender, and just to move Ortiz to short and just keep those guys kind of consistently at one spot all the time instead of trying to toggle it around. But tons of different ways it could actually play out. Brock Wilken, by the way, got hit by a pitch in the face early last season. So
that's right.
You could look at that and say that probably had an impact of some kind on what that season looked like. He's a big guy. I'd be very surprised if he didn't have above average bat speed, just having seen a little bit of him in spring training last year. He's a unit, as the kids used to say. I don't think they say that anymore, but they did say it at one point in time. And then the last thing on the hitter side, Christian Yelich did say, quote, "I don't see any reason why I won't be ready for opening day," when he was asked a few days ago by the Brewers beat. That was from Adam McKelvey, MLB.com. So it looks like everything's tracking pretty good for Yelich.
Frelick would be my favorite if he played third base.
Yeah,
Durbin just really hits the ball softly. 25% hard hit rate in AAA last year. That's just the absolute softest. That's softer than Turang.
I see a lot of John Birdie in that profile, at least as it is currently built. That's what I kind of who I compared him to at the time of the trade.
Who's your guy at third?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think
we got our answer. I think.
I think my expectation all along has been that they'll find a way to pull a rabbit out of their hat.
Oh, I got a rabbit for you.
Yeah,
Brendan Rodgers.
A late spring edition. Okay, I could.
Did they have $3 to $5 million?
Sure, I don't think that's a problem.
Yeah, I think he would be good. I think it might require then doing something different with Turang and Ortiz, maybe because of Rodgers' arm or whatever. But
yeah, that would be a kind of a bummer to have to mess with that. So maybe it's not on the roster yet. I don't know. I honestly, I don't have a strong feel for this right now. I want to see if they're actually serious about Frelick doing it again. But
yeah,
I don't get the sense that that's like plan.
They have some outfield depth because they can go 4 deep with Perkins out there.
Yeah. Let's talk about the pitching for a bit. It's one big change with Nestor Cortez joining the mix. You get a full season of Aaron Savala. You do lose Devin Williams out of the bullpen in the aforementioned trade that brought Nestor Cortez and Caleb Durbin to Milwaukee. Some depth guys are gone. Montas, who they acquired at the deadline, Colin Ray, some bullpen guys like Hobie Milner, Bryce Wilson, Joe Ross, they're all gone as well. I think the question people are asking right now is if Trevor McGill, who's slowed by a couple of ailments this spring, if he's not the closer on opening day because of injuries, who's actually getting save opportunities out of that Milwaukee bullpen from the jump?
If it's not McGill?
Yeah.
I know that, people like Piamps to some degree. But I just kind of feel like that has been just a stopgap measure. So if it's a bigger deal injury, then I wonder if they would reach to like Jared Koenig maybe. Like I know he's a lefty, but he throws harder than Piamps. I think he has better projections than Piamps and better stuff than Piamps. Neither one of them really profiles as a closer. But I don't know. Maybe they just kind of do both. It's not as obvious to me. We did have a Yoho as a guy that popped in the model, but there's not an obvious, like when Williams was hurt, I was all over Trevor Megill, and I don't have that in front of me right now.
It's less clear this time around, but given what they've been able to do, the number of relievers they've found and developed and tweaked over the years, they'll have someone. I think there's a few things with other roles that will ultimately determine who that could be. If Aaron Ashby's in the back of the rotation, then it's not Ashby. But if he's not in the rotation, if Tyler Alexander is the fifth starter or something to start the year, then maybe it's Ashby. If Jacob Mizorowski's in the bullpen, he could be the guy. And I would point to
Uribe. It's not even listed on this right now, so I don't know if it's because of injury or just I don't know where he's going to be on the roster.
Yeah, I mean it's bad command, but they were so quick to give him the opportunity to begin last year before McGill actually kind of took over for Williams. It makes me think that anything's possible as far as someone with very limited experience in the big leagues maybe coming in and taking that role. So it's wide open. I got to keep a close eye on this one throughout the spring. DL Hall's got a lat strain right now. His role's kind of up in the air. You mentioned Yoho.
Man, he just can't stay healthy. God.
No, you really can't. The good news on Brendan Woodruff, too, he's making progress coming back from anterior capsule surgery, unlikely for opening day, but at least heading in the direction you'd hope he'd be in February. So
I was scared straight by the email from, was it Dr.
Tim?
Dr. Tim sent us an email about anterior capsule repairs, and it scared me straight. So if you look at my rankings, you'll see basically Woodruff is on a do not draft for me. Love Peralta, though. Savali is a Stuff Plus darling that I think Milwaukee made the right tweaks to his arsenal last year. I think he will probably go in and out because I think what happens is it's a lot to ask him to throw a cutter, a slider, and a curve. And I think sometimes, and I think he even does like cutter, gyro, slider, sweeper, and curve. And it's like, okay, so you're spinning the ball 4 different ways that sometimes can blend with each other. I think that just goes in and out for him sometimes. That's when the home runs come and the walks come, and because he's not a good fastball guy, he can't just blow it by anybody. So I think that's just part of the package. You're going to have Savali and maybe some days not want to use him. But I really like Nestor Cortez. I think Myers, he has a really good changeup, and he could throw that pitch more. There are actually ways for him to have more strikeouts and be a more conventional starter than this kind of, tunneling surprise good starter with bad strikeout rates. Like there is some stuff in there for Tobias Myers. Look at his changeup Stuff Plus. It's pretty good. So I think Myers is an underrated pitcher. So they've done a good job putting together 4 guys. The 5th guy will be tough for them coming out of spring. Who's it going to be? I think Aaron Ashby has got to be the answer there.
Ashby has looked really good in the bullpen. He's had a really nice Sierra the entire time he's been in the big leagues. He's been in fits and spurts, different roles, but you have to imagine that you look at him, they gave him an extension a couple of years ago too. You would want to try him as a starter again before you fully go down the reliever rabbit hole. I think you're confident he'll be a great reliever, but I think you have to believe he could also still be a pretty good starter because the stuff is good enough. And post-injury, further removed from injury himself, I think we're starting to see the Ashby that we were all hoping for a couple of years ago when he broke through. So my pick would be Ashby for now, but I think he's the kind of guy for fantasy purposes, where if it doesn't work as a starter, it's going to end up in the very high leverage spots late in games where it could end up being a part of the closer solution as well.
And I mean, I know Jacob Mizorowski, we should mention him. He's a fun prospect. We've talked about him a fair amount. High stuff, low walk, like low command kind of approach. I just don't think that's, I mean, if there's always the chance that Ashby's injured again too, because he's had some troubles with injuries too. So I think that right now Mizorowski is somewhere around 6th or 7th on the depth chart. So definitely a possibility that he could surprise, have a good spring, show good command. Ashby's hurting, and then he's the answer, because I don't really know the other answer. I don't think Robert Gasser is ready yet.
Mid-season, probably, like second half, mid second half even.
I'm not seeing a lot of starting pitching prospects that are supposedly ready for the big leagues right away. They could surprise and sign Jose Quintana. to a cheap deal. So there's a chance that they catch a veteran here, but I think they're hoping for Ashby.
I think they got their guy with Tyler Alexander. Looks like that is a more complete group of pitchers right now overall, and they're going to try to find a way to make it work. But generally a group that's undervalued by ADP. I think you can do pretty well if you're just going to bank on what they've been able to do as an organization. Win total projection from Pagoda, 80.6 for these Brewers. Too hot, too cold, or just right?
That's too cold. Come on.
I wrote too cold, obviously, on the rundown. What do you expect me to say?
They also they have a, let's see what it is, over at Fangraphs. They have the Brewers for 81 wins, which is, see?
Yeah, way too cold.
Too cold by 0.4.
There's agreement on what the Brewers, as they're constructed, are. I think across the projection systems, the lack of agreement comes with the Cubs, but we'll get to them in a little while.
Right, and I think that you can say, like, without even talking about the Brewers' quality, you can say that the Brewers are better than the Cardinals, Reds, and Pirates, probably. Without saying anything about them versus the Cubs. And if they're better than the Cardinals, Reds, and Pirates this year, then how are they going to end up at 81 and 81? They're going to play those guys 16 times.
Right. Yeah. That's the way it works out. Still see them a lot being in the same division. Let's get to those Cardinals.
Why are we doing the Cardinals second?
Because we go in order of the previous year's standings. They finished
ahead of the Cubs last year?
They sure did.
Oh my God. That's so weird. So weird. It's weird that I don't know that, but I don't know. Last year's standings gone already.
Just erased from those memories. Long gone. Okay, so this has been a weird offseason for the Cardinals. You look around, who's in? Nobody. It's just it's the same cast that was there last year, except Paul Goldschmidt's gone. He's a Yankee now. So one everyday role opened up. One of the 5 spots is there. You look at this group by projection. Mason Wynn, projected to be an everyday guy. Nolan Arenado, as long as he's there, he's part of that 5 as well. Brendan Donovan, 3rd in plate appearance projections. He's a nice player. I feel like every time he comes up, I talk down about him. I just think he's a good first guy off the bench. He's probably not a guy you want to have playing every day on a contending team.
I don't know. 108 WRC plus. That's got to be top 10 among second basemen. So.
But we're talking about a guy projected for 570 plate appearances who's going to hit 11 homers and steal 5 bases. It's just a pretty empty. Of all the ways to be better than league average, that's like a very boring way to get there.
Yeah.
There's no ceiling there. At least it doesn't appear to be.
Making contact and spraying the ball, getting some walks. It's kind of a dirtbag way of getting there.
So you move Wilson Contreras into Paul Goldschmidt's spot at first base. Good for his projection. We've talked about that. Gives him a shot to go well over 500 plate appearances, health permitting. Win Arenado, Contreras. There's your first 3. Who are the other 2 that are in their core 5 right now as this roster's built?
I think Alec Burleson is a platoon bat. We did get some pushback in the Discord of some thinking that maybe he could push past that and he's underrated. And I do think he's a decent bat and probably underrated by these projections here for 101 WRC plus. But I think that he's a platoon bat myself. So I don't think it's him. I think it's Walker and Nootbaar. And if not by quality, maybe Donovan beats them in quality by WAR or even WRC plus or whatever. I think it'll be because it's important for their future to know if they're in the rule of 5. So they will be in the rule of 5 because they want them to be. So Walker, Nootbaar, and Wynn are the future for this team. And so I think they'll all be in everyday roles because that's what they need to do to go forward. I don't know if that courtesy extends to Victor Scott myself because the projections are so bad on Scott and he's looked so lost in the big leagues, and they have Michael Ciani, who's could be like a Jose Siri type, where just a very fast, very good defender. The floor is so high, and this team so often, the cardinal way for me is like floor over ceiling sometimes, right? Just like credible starters at every position. I could see Ciani breaking camp as the starting center fielder and not Victor Scott. But I do think that Walker and Nootbaar are so important to them offensively that they will get everyday at-bats.
Victor Scott played about a half season in AAA last year, hit a 210, 294, 303 line. So I think he can pretty safely pencil back into AAA to start the year. It's just it's not ready yet. So yeah, that's where your deep league Mike Ciani love really makes a lot of sense to me, especially so that he can play center field, and they're going to need someone to hold that spot until Scott is ready. I think I'm with you on Walker and Nootbaar though. And Walker, I can't explain what happened to him last year. It just didn't make sense. The logical progression for a player that does what Jordan Walker did in 2013 at the age in which he did it in the big leagues with really nice top end exit velocities. No explanation whatsoever. I mean, how much of this is having to play the outfield and learning defensively on the job in the big leagues and all that negativity that swirls around him? Like what is going on with Jordan Walker? Because it looks like there's still a ton in terms of raw potential here. And if he can tap into that, that's one of the ways things could look a little bit better for this Cardinals lineup.
I really wanted to share this leaderboard of August and September bat speed with a low level, minimum level to get in. And Jordan Walker is 4th and Matt Wallner is 7th. The reason I bring up Matt Wallner is I think Jordan Walker can be a Matt Wallner. You know, what are we talking about with Wallner? We're talking about a guy who swings and misses a lot, but he makes really hard contact when he does. And you can see that in the squared up percentage where Wallner, Junior Caminero has like a 33% squared up percentage in here. Judge 30, Julio Rodriguez 30, O'Neal Cruz 38, so they're doing great. Walker has a 29% by contact, 20% by swing. His numbers there look a little bit more like Wallner or Schwarber, So I do think the swing and miss that we saw, in Walker's profile that we weren't sure was going to actually be there coming up. I think it's for real. So that I don't think he's going to be like an 18, 20% strikeout rate guy. I think it's going to be 25, 26, 27 at least. I think the real key for him is just getting the ball off the ground. And the reason that I think he can do it is because he did it in the minor leagues. He had reasonable ground ball rates in the minor leagues. I think if he can get back to a 45% ground ball rate in the big leagues, a guy who's hit the ball 115.5 miles an hour is going to make enough hard contact to be kind of maybe a low batting average, low OBP slugger type. And what's funny is that when I saw him, my scouting, tendencies was I don't like his swing, and I never really liked him as a prospect. But I'm back in now because the top end velos are there, and even if I think his swing is a little bit muscled up and it doesn't look like he has live hands, like it doesn't look like he can really adjust mid swing. I don't get that sort of idea from him. He has such good bat speed that he's just going to hit the ball really hard. People are excited to some extent about John Kensuke Noel,
Right.
And Walker has better, not as bad swing and miss as John Kensuke Noel. So just reframe your expectations to Matt Wallner, John Kensuke Noel, not like maybe Joe Adele-ish, like that kind of. He's going to be that kind of offensive player where it's going to be swing and miss, but he's going to make really hard contact. Then if you reframe that and you put that player in St. Louis, you realize the ceiling isn't amazing, but and the floor is pretty low, but he deserves to be on sleeper lists.
Yeah, I do think with Walker, if he gets to 500 plus plate appearances, 517 is what you see on the screen with the Bat X projection next to it. I think he's hitting more than 15 home runs with that kind of playing time.
It's kind of hard to do both things. Like they're going to give him 517 plate appearances. He's only going to hit 15 homers. I don't know. I think if they give him 517, it's because he's hitting for power.
Yeah. So I do look at that and say, okay, I'm probably up above that pretty high if I'm taking that late flyer on Jordan Walker. But I do think this is the kind of year where the Cardinals need to learn a lot about some of their younger players that were recently graduated prospects and get a sense for whether or not they're part of the future. Nolan Gorman's part of that group for me too. Still a lot of swing and miss in that projection, still big time power. I think you want to kind of figure it out this year as far as is he there as a regular in 2026
it would have been so
and
much better if they traded Arenado, because then they could give full-time gigs to Gorman and Burleson, and also fold Sagasi into the mix to give him a taste of the big leagues and see how he's doing. As it is, that's probably the kind of second half plan, after they trade Arenado midseason.
Yeah, and maybe they can trade him a little sooner than that. Maybe they can do like a late May or a June trade. That's always possible, but it's seemingly less likely for a player with as much money on his contract as Nolan Arenado has. The big questions with the Cardinals for me are what, if anything, has changed to this point with pitching development. I mean, you see Sonny Gray as someone that we both like atop the rotation. I think he's underdrafted right now in most leagues. And beyond that, it's kind of like, all right, we're waiting for Quinn Matthews and Tink Hens and some of the young guys to come in and take over spots that are currently held by Miles Michaelis and Eric Fetty. Just it looks like they're going to go through a pretty big organizational transition for how they value, seek out, coach, and develop pitching. And I think we're just beginning to get into that. So it may take a year or two before we start getting really excited about some of the guys that they're bringing up to the top levels of that system.
And, when you're changing the way you think about pitching and the way you model it and the way you coach it, there is a kind of lagging component of that, which is what the meat you're putting into the grinder. And the way that I can kind of put an example on it is this: you could be improving your coaching process. And I think the St. Louis has got to be improving their coaching process. I believe in Chaim Bloom in this way, that he knows the right people. He's hiring the right people. We've seen some of that evidence. He's hired some interesting people from the Guardians and so on. But you already drafted Quinn Matthews. So your best minds in coaching are working with a completely refined college starter that, pitched a ton in college and probably is who he is to some extent. It's probably hard to change Quinn Matthews in the way that, you might be able to change a 17-year-old high schooler. So Quinn Matthews stuff plus on the slider is pretty good, 107. On the changeup, 98. That's maybe passable. On the curveball, 95. That's not super exciting. On the four-seam fastball, 90. And on the sinker, 89. This sounds like every Cardinals starter ever. And so it's hard for me to get that excited about him. He could be a large mix guy with command and stuff, but I just don't think that he's a top-end possibility. I'm not even sure that I believe in a 3.74 ERA that he's got projected right now. So Quinn Matthews is going to get a shot at some point. Steve Matz can't stay healthy. Andre Palante is like a reliever convert. Eric Fetty's going to get traded as soon as someone wants him. Sonny Gray could get traded any minute. So Quinn Matthews, I think, will get 100 major league innings this year, especially since he's kind of a workhorse that way. I just don't know how excited to get about it, And Matthew Liberatore is the example that came before. It's just how excited do you get about another kind of large mix? He's got command. It's super refined. And then you look at the stuff plus numbers and you're like, oh, that's why you got him.
Yeah. And they did leave the door open for some of the younger guys to take on roles by letting Kyle Gibson walk in free agency. Lance Lynn's gone. Lost a couple guys in the bullpen with Giovanni Gallegos, Andrew Kittredge moving on. We talked about Ryan Helsley on the closer preview. I mean, I think he's in that circle of trust. Closers we like. If this team's not contending midseason, he's probably working in another bullpen, possibly closing games somewhere else. I think he has the type of stuff where he's like good enough to close on many teams, but if a super team with an elite bullpen acquired him, then all bets are off because he could end up in the 7th or 8th inning just because there are two other guys that are just as good as him.
Yeah, I don't know that I can identify a real easy replacement either, because there's just nobody who blows you away with their stuff. I guess it might be Ryan Fernandez, but he's got a 100 stuff plus. That's a little bit underwhelming for a closer. And none of their other guys are like super obvious. Gordon Gracefo is listed as a long reliever. I wonder if you could get a big velo boost, but he's at 93.5, so I don't even think that he's, even with the velo boost, he wouldn't have above average velo for a closer. So I don't have a closer in waiting yet on this team. We may find him in spring.
Right. And I think that's something I do like to really dig into in the spring. See who pops, see who came in on an NRI or someone from the org that took a big step forward this winter. Just looks completely different. I think that's where the next closer can come from in some of the more unsettled situations.
I guess Jojo like Romero might be my guy, but he's also a left-hander that's kind of sinker slider, so it's a little bit of a weird combo for closer.
So this team by PECTOA projected for 77.7 wins. Too hot, too cold, or just right for these Cardinals?
Too hot. The projection system can't see that they're going to sell pieces. So they're going to be on like a 70-something win pace, and then they're going to sell pieces and get worse.
I wonder, I think the only way that doesn't play out is if they just get red hot in the first half for a little while and then decide to play the middle and hang around, because anyone can do that. But I'm leaning more on the too hot. This team doesn't feel like it's very good. And some of the guys that we want to see get better should have started to get better by now if that was going to all click this year. So enjoy it while you can, rest of the NL Central. I don't think they're going to be down for long. I think they're headed in the right direction.
The rose-colored glasses is, that last part you were just saying. The rose-colored glasses is there are pieces here for the future, and you can get excited about Sagasi. And Gorman could be a slugging second baseman, that just isn't amazing defensively, kind of what you'd think of as a third baseman. Maybe he's your third baseman, and it makes sense. Gorman as Max Muncy, and Nootbaar, if he could just stay healthy for a full season, might not have shown us his best yet. And then Jordan Walker is obviously someone I think that could really benefit from, we talked a little bit about giving people chances, full year chances. This is that year where people get 500 plate appearances and tell the Cardinals who they are for the future.
Yeah, we'll see how that all plays out here in the months ahead. Let's move it over to the Cubs. They finished third last year, but they are the favorites to win the division by projections. Pretty big gap from PECTOA, like 10 wins, I think, above the Brewers, which I think many, many Brewers fans would squabble with immediately, and understandably so. One thing about the Cubs that is a little bit easier to see is their core five bats, right? The guys they're going to lean on most heavily.
Yeah, you sort it by plate appearances. They're right there.
They're right there in front of your face. When you trade for Kyle Tucker, obviously that's one right there. But the holdovers that go with him, Ian Happ, Dansby Swanson, Seiya Suzuki, and probably Pete Crow Armstrong ahead of Michael Busch. But you can see Michael Busch at least on the big side of platoon. I know he played better than expected against lefties last year. I don't know how much I trust that, but he could be right there too. It's one of those teams that I think some people look at the bench and say, why is it a bunch of light hitting utility guys? It's because they actually have more than 5 guys that should play every day.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty good lineup. It's the only question is what they do with Nico Horner's spot while he's recovering, and third base. And again, we've seen that many teams have pain points at one position, and having a top prospect like Matt Shaw as a potential solution at third base, those projections could be light. So how much do you really need on the bench anyway? You just need someone who can play second base, who can back up short. Dansby Swanson's been kind of an Iron Man at short, and you don't even really need them to be that great at center, because you're going to leave Pete Crow in there for his defense most days. So yeah, I could see this team producing a fair amount of 600 plate appearance players. Just plug and go with most of these guys.
Yeah, I think one of my takeaways looking at the Cubs is I think they're going to score a lot of runs. Like maybe they're a little underrated.
Them. Zips loves them more than almost any projection system too. Zips really loves this offense.
I get it, because it's above average players that are going to play a ton, and a couple of really high end guys with Tucker specifically, at least for this year. Don't know if we'll get an extension, but nonetheless, like this is a good lineup. Doesn't seem to have any holes. Has some young guys breaking through. The big question I think we have beyond Matt Shaw, like is he ready? Is he an everyday guy from the jump? They did add Justin Turner to the mix, so there's your possible platoon partner. for Michael Busch and maybe someone they can use temporarily to sort of buffer some time for Matt Shaw if he's not ready on opening day. But man, Shaw does everything we like in a fantasy player.
And
so I
defensively,
think it's going to happen.
Really want to put Turner out there. So
right.
I think Birdie makes this team. It's a major league deal, right? Yeah, it's a major league deal. So, and he fulfills the need, which is someone to play second while Horner, because Horner might not make opening day, if I remember correctly. He's in a great spot. He's not going to miss much time, if at all. So I hear not ready for opening day. And then if he is on the IL to make for opening day, I think that Vidal Brujan might make this roster just because he's then the backup at second and short. You just need another body on the infield if Horner's not there. So chance for Brujan to be there for a little bit. I don't think it's necessarily an impact year for Brujan because at some point Horner's back and I think Brujan goes back down. In the outfield, I've mentioned that people are excited about Owen Cassie. And as a prospect, behind a veteran outfield, there's a chance that he could come up and play, but he is 22. He's not too old yet to be playing AAA. 24 is the average age in AAA. And he does have some strikeouts that he could work on. So there are things that he could work on in the minor leagues. And on top of that, you have a very similarly profiled Alexander Canario, who strikes out too much, is a little bit older at 24, but is out of options and, plays center field to an extent. So I think if you're building a bench, it's Canario, Brujan, Kelly, and Turner. And you're done.
Yeah, pretty straightforward as it's currently constructed. And again, well built pretty much top to bottom. As far as Pete Crow Armstrong goes, do you see another level or possibly two over what he's projected to bring at the plate? And the combination of power and speed with an everyday role, that's going to make him pretty valuable. It's like your third outfielder in a lot of different leagues. Obviously, from a real life perspective, the glove is phenomenal and the raw tools have always been intriguing, but what do you think that final line looks like? Are we talking about a guy at the end of the season who is a tick below average with the bat by overall slash line because of the swing and miss or the lack of patience? Or do you see another level coming right away?
You can do some monthly split playing where you're like, oh my God, he had an 18% strikeout rate in June. And what if he does that, But if you look at the rolling graphs, a little bit slightly different picture emerges where his K rate did spike early at 40%, then it really improved, and he was running a 10 to 15% strikeout rate for a little bit, and then it went back up. You can see that they started filling up the zone low with him sliders. He was seeing a lot of sliders late in the year. You can see that he's alternated, at his very best. He was striking out 15% of the time and hard hitting 40% of the time. So if you focus just on that, I think you could tell a story of him really breaking out. But I tend to zoom out a little bit and just see these peaks and valleys of strikeout rate, and that's just going to be the story of Pico Armstrong. He's going to go in and out and be streaky, I think. And maybe he can catch a good streak, and that'll be his peak season. And that season, he'll have a good strikeout rate, and he'll hit 25 homers and steal 35 bags and hit 275 or something, and that'll be what everyone chases. But if I have a prediction about his career, is that he'll be more in and out. And you mentioned Michael Taylor once, and I think there's some truth in that.
Yeah, from the left side, but similar in terms of the low average OBP combination with the tools that play up and make him still a really exciting player, even if he's not quite the perennial all-star, top 50 overall all-round sort of guy. On the pitching side, Shota Imanaga, year one in the big leagues was fantastic, especially in the first half, but overall very successful first season for him with the Cubs. Justin Steele kind of up there in the top with him as the 1-2 punch top the rotation for now. You got Jameson Taillon back as a pretty solid 3, albeit a guy with a low K rate. And then they bring in Matthew Boyd, Boyd is one of those guys where it's like, okay, he said health problems in recent years, so we haven't seen a lot of big workloads from him. But in the little bits we have seen him, there's been a little more swing and miss, and it's hard for me to pin down like what his skills baseline is. He doesn't have to be more than like a number 3, number 4 starter type in this rotation, but I'm curious how good you think the Cubs pitching is as a whole, because as much as I like that lineup and as dangerous as I think they are almost top to bottom, I think this is where they could be a bit vulnerable.
Yeah, I don't love it, especially the depth is pretty boring to me other than Boyd. Right now the Cubs are around 18th or 19th by Fangraphs WAR. Let's see if I can find it. 19th. And they say Monaga and Steele are comfortably above average, near all-star level starters, and that there's not a league average starter on the team other than them. I do like Ben Brown, but the Stuff Plus update was not super kind to him and doesn't even really like his fastball, despite the fact that he threw it 96.7. So I don't know what happened there. He does have an elite knuckle curve that will give him strikeouts and is a better pitch, one-on-one than maybe anything from Assad, Boyd, and Ray, other than maybe Boyd's slider. So Ben Brown deserves to be a part of this picture. Jordan Wicks, as much as I don't love him, has a wide mix of 5 pitches, a 102 Stuff Plus, and a good changeup and slider combination with a above average fastball. Like, I think Jordan Wicks might actually be ahead of Colin Ray, and with Javier Assad being hurt, Wicks has a chance here. So if you put Wicks and Brown in there ahead of Colin Ray, I feel a little bit better about it. I would say they could be a league average starting rotation.
Couple additions in the bullpen too. They traded for Ryan Presley. They got Ryan Brazier when he got pushed off the Dodgers roster. You've mentioned Nate Pearson in the past as someone you like. Porter Hodge looked like he was taking a pretty big step last year.
This bullpen is better than it's been in a while. This is a better bullpen than they've had in a while.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that was a pretty glaring weakness in the last couple of years when we've done these previews. I think they've fixed it to the point where it's at least, an average major league bullpen, maybe even a little better.
I stick by my projection that by the end of the season, Hodge will be closing over Ryan Presley.
Okay. We'll let you keep that one. That's that's okay. The PECTOA total for the Cubs, 90.6. Too hot, too cold, or just right?
I'm gonna go just right. I don't want to push it harder than that with some of the flaws we see in that pitching staff.
I think that's fair because Justin Steele also has some lingering arm problems that have been a problem too. And he's really important for them. He beats the projections. He's been very, very good.
I mean, him and Shota are like, they're the two guys that could be stars. So if any sort of hurting to them, I don't know that, even as much as I like Wicks or Brown, that they're necessarily going to step into that level of quality.
Yeah, I landed on just right for this Cubs team as well. I think they deserve to be projected to win the division by a pretty small margin, more like the Fangraphs margin than what I see on PECTOA. But generally, that to me is just the Brewers being too light in PECTOA. It's not the Cubs being too hot. So I think it's going to be a really fun race in the NL Central. A lot of folks are wondering how many teams are actually in that race this year. And let's get to the Reds. I looked at this Reds team where they added Gavin Lux. They were kind of sniffing around trying to get a Luis Robert trade in. Instead, they bring in Austin Hayes as a right-handed outfielder to mix and match. Change a backup catcher with Jose Trevino. Good glove, not much of a bat. Ty France out of the mix, but mostly the same group of hitters coming back and maybe just hoping for better health from the group, right? Because Matt McClain is healthy now. Christian Encarnacion Strand missed most of last season. He's healthy now. Noelvi Marte suspended and hurt last year. He's healthy now. So I think they're banking on getting more out of several guys they were hoping to rely on a year ago.
Yeah, but if you start thinking about the rule of 5, you actually realize how quickly it breaks down. You're like Ellie, yeah, love it. Matt McClain, yep, love it. Spencer Steer, yep, strong I like his two-strike approach. Just a really good player, maybe not a star necessarily, but an everyday player. So you got 3. And I think it starts breaking down after that. I mean, Heimer Candelario is old and not projected well. Friedel's not projected well. I mean, you could keep him in there for some glove, but he wasn't one of the best center fielders in there. Tyler Stevenson projects well with the bat for a catcher, but is he like really what we think of as a Rule of 5 type? He's not like a Contreras,
Right.
So Austin Hayes, I think, is a part-time player. Gavin Lux could step into that role. And then my favorite for stepping into the role is Christian Encarnacion Strand, just because he projects to be one of the 5 players on this team that are going to be above average by WRC plus. And they're going to just need that bat, and they can figure out how to move the gloves around to accommodate him.
Yeah, in trading away Jonathan India, I think they did do themselves a favor. I was surprised it was trade away India and add Lux, because it feels like they just went with a left-handed guy that gives them a similar crowd. Maybe that's better overall for the balance of the roster, though, given the personnel at their disposal. I think the thing I like about the way their lineup is built is that a few of their core guys, their whole core, it's power and speed. So there are different ways they can burn you. There are different ways they can put runs on the board. We know the ballpark also boosts homers, so they have that in their back pocket as well. The Jeimer Candelario fit continues to be weird. I think you were right to call that out. That's one of those areas where that projection could come in lighter in terms of playing time if he continues to struggle. We talked about their DH spot being a little bit up in the air before, too. I think that's still very true. Look at Jake Fraley's projection, down to an 82 WRC plus. So I would say nothing's really guaranteed to him. It's big side platoon or bust, moving between the corner outfield and the DH spot. But it's a lot of faith in the guys that were not healthy or unavailable last year. And of the 3, out of McLean, Encarnacion Strand, and Noelvi Marte, I do think the floor with Encarnacion Strand seems the safest, just in terms of what you have to pay in drafts to get them. Mm-hmm. I think Matt McLean is a better all-around player, but you're still not getting enough of a discount on Matt McLean in fantasy to account for the massive shoulder problem that cost them a year.
It's a shoulder problem that cost them a year, but it's also, you pile that on top of, kind of a breakout power numbers that aren't necessarily fully supported by all of his metrics. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a 10% barrel rate and a 216 ISO, maybe, but with a 109.9 max EV, and then, some ISOs that started with 100 in the minors, I think the power was his softest tool among the group. And so if you then add a shoulder injury to it and you shave his power projections, now you're getting a guy that could be projected for 250, 15, 15. Or 15, 18. I know he does have elite speed, but he only stole 14 bags and 403 plate appearances. So that's our baseline. So if he's 250, 15, 18, you're probably overpaying for him in drafts right now.
Is there anybody else other than Christian Encarnacion Strand, as you look at the bottom part of the hitter group, you say, you know what, I think that guy's going to play a lot more than the projections are suggesting? Because if they're light in their core group of 5, that means there's opportunity here.
Yeah, I keep thinking that the outfield is more in flux than maybe people think. And I don't know. I think maybe Hayes has a chance to become an everyday player. And I think he's going to take to that park, and he used to be an everyday player. He's projected to be right around league average overall. As a righty, it seems like, I don't know that I think it might be a little bit early to be riding his death knell and make him only versus lefties. So if the health is there, I don't know. I don't think that much of Stuart Fairchild. And I think Friedel and Fraley are both marginal type players. And then you can even play Steer on the infield, Encarnacion Strand at DH. So there's other ways that Hayes can scratch out full-time playing time.
I had a fun fact for this team The PECTOA system has the Reds scoring the second most runs in the division, which makes sense given the ballpark and some of the pieces they have, even if we're not quite sure how the playing time shakes out across the entire group. But they're also projected to allow more than every team in baseball, other than the Rockies and White Sox. The Nats and Marlins are close to that level. So basically a bottom 5 expectation in run prevention. And I'm not sure I believe that. I actually think they might be a little worse offensively than projected and a little better at run prevention and pitching than projected, because I kind of like this group. I think Hunter Green took some steps forward last year. Nick Martinez is someone I continue to underestimate. He accepted the qualifying offer, so he stays in the mix for them. I think you look at Nick Lodolo as a longtime sleeper and riser that just needs to stay healthy. You could look at Green and Lodolo as a 1-2. You could talk yourself into Rhett Lauder getting some opportunities. They added Brady Singer for depth. I know the park change going from KC to Cincinnati might be tough because it may just juice up that home run rate a bit. But I actually like the options they have to start games. It's another team where, kind of like Cubs bullpens of recent years, you look at and say, I don't know if I like that relief core all that much, but I think the starting pitching might be a little underrated here.
Yeah, Fangraphs has, I was going to, say that Fangraphs has the relief crew as bottom 5 in the big leagues, and I don't necessarily disagree. So whatever, you think of the starting rotation, your bullpen is pitching half the games too. So that's gonna drag them down a little bit. And just to temper your optimism a little bit, Andrew Abbott and Rhett Lauder are both behind in camp, and they both had injuries last year that they're dealing with. Abbott's being a shoulder is that cut his season short is not great to throw on top of the fact that every model doesn't like him. It's not just Stuff Plus. I mean, you can look at every model is projecting high 4s ERAs out of Andrew Abbott, despite like a 3.3 ERA for his career. So whatever it is, I feel like what is it here for Andrew Abbott? 3.78 for his career, 4.78 Sierra last year. Projections, the bat says 4.85 ERA. So it's an amazing sort of battle of the wits between Andrew Abbott and all the projection systems that I would love to see him be healthy and play out this year, because I want to know more. I want to know what we're missing. He's a confounder. The other guys, Martinez, Singer, I do think they can be role players. I'm not that big on Rhett Lauder as a prospect, and for me, Lodolo and Green are the 1-2 of the future or the present, and it's all about Lodolo's health. But if you get, if you got a surprise season with 160 innings from Lodolo, then I'll agree with you, because then I think Green and Lodolo are your stars, and then Singer, Martinez, and Abbott can be fine, sort of mid to back rotation types.
Yeah, I do think Chase Burns could move quickly, but I don't know if he's going to move so quickly that he actually debuts by the end of 2025. That might require the Reds to be in the mix for a playoff spot, or something along those lines, for them to be that aggressive with the timeline. But he's probably part of this conversation when we do this for 2026. You mentioned that bullpen, Alexis Diaz. I just keep waiting for him to lose the job, and we talked about it in the closer preview. I don't know if I see an obvious candidate to be the next guy up. I think Taylor Rogers might be my preferred option to do it if they're just looking for someone out of those late inning options, because at the very least he's done the job before. It's been inconsistent in the years since he was a regular closer, though, and I think the ballpark especially is going to make life a bit more difficult for Taylor Rogers.
Tony Santillan has okay stuff, 105 stuff plus, 97 on the fastball, but a really good slider, and had a really good season last year, so he could be a dark horse there. But I thought you were going to say our real dark horse here that we might like. Oh,
well, yeah. I was saving that for the very end, but we can throw that out there now. Well, it depends on the injuries, though, with the rotation, because if they're really shorthanded in the rotation, maybe Graham Ashcraft has to temporarily start to begin the year. But, man, you've always been able to look at him in the model and say it could work as a starter. It should definitely work as a reliever. So if they commit to Graham Ashcraft as a short reliever, I think he starts to pop as your who should close if Alexis Diaz is not the closer in Cincinnati question.
Yeah, although the most recent run of Stuff Plus really turfed Ashcraft. He's down to a 100 Stuff Plus, and it doesn't like the cutter as much as it used to. So I don't know whatever reason that is. Although, yes, go to the pen, get some more ticks, don't throw that sinker, all sorts of ways for him to contribute more as a closer.
All right, we got to take a look at the win projection here because we still got one more team to go. 74.5 is the win total projection for these Reds. Too hot, too cold, or just right?
I don't know if they're that bad, dude. I'm going to go with too cold.
Too cold. All right. I think it's just right. I think the problems in run prevention are generally real, even though their rotation might be a tick underrated. They may still struggle to round out the bottom half of that lineup. That's a legitimate concern, I think, when it comes to the Reds this year.
At some point, it seemed like they had just so many young players that they were going to have too many, and now you look and you're like, do they have enough?
Do they have enough? Yeah, it's crazy how quickly that can change, but I don't think we're the only ones who have that view right now of this Reds team. You want to take a look at a team that has some questions, though. Let's talk about the Pirates. The questions here are just ridiculous. Who's in their five? Like, really? Like, who's actually
Brian
in their
Reynolds
five?
And O'Neill Cruz.
So they have two guys in their five because their offseason was make a trade to get Spencer Horwitz, sign Tommy Pham late, and add Adam Frazier.
Horwitz is out 6 to 8 weeks and may not be ready for opening day.
Right, and they lost mostly role players, Brian De La Cruz, Michael Taylor, Connor Joe, Roddy Tellez, all out of the equation. So it's not like they lost a bunch of 550-plus plate appearance guys either. I think the scenario I put out there for the Pirates a few weeks ago when we had Keith Law on the show was, could they end up in a world where they have to play Joey Bart, Henry Davis, and Endy Rodriguez all in the same lineup just because Davis is in the outfield, Rodriguez can move around a little bit. Andrew McCutchen's the DH, so you don't have the DH spot to play with, but I think they have enough versatility from Rodriguez where they might be able to do that, and they may have to just to find enough quality bats to put in this lineup every day.
Yeah, I mean, I like Horwitz, but he was a platoon option for them, I think, and McCutchen is a strict platoon option. So that's already two players that are platooning there. I don't think any of the Bart, Rodriguez, Davis, I don't think are going to be somebody that would make their case for the top five on offense alone, So you are hurting filling out the back of this. I do think Brian Hayes is part of the five, and that's been a reason for me to draft him this year because I think the quantity is going to be there. I don't know. I remain agnostic. I have become agnostic about the quality. I used to be excited about the quality, and now for me, Brian Hayes is a quantity play because I just don't know if he'll ever turn that prodigious bat speed and top end batted ball quality into any sort of power because he just hasn't done it for any sustained amount of time. Maybe having a teammate like Tommy Pham could unlock it. Pham himself used to be kind of more of a ground ball guy and found a way to lift it. So he has his own story there that he can talk to Hayes about. And also Pham is a proselytizer of data and tech. So he could be really good for him. I don't know what else. I think that it's going to be a lot of mix and match. Maybe Nick Gonzalez or Nick York, one of those two. Can jump into the top five. Nick Gonzalez was interesting because he came up last year, and he was drafted as a guy that was supposed to make contact and be powerful. And then in the minors, he had strikeout rates near 30%. Then he comes up, he makes a bit of a swing change last year. He strikes out 16% of the time in the minors. You're like, oh, that's what I thought of as Nick Gonzalez. And he strikes out 19% in the majors. But the swinging strike rates weren't that much better. He went from 15s and 16s to 13 and 14. So I don't know if the underlying swing data suggests that Nick Gonzalez can have this kind of a strikeout rate. He may be a 23 to 25 guy. Oops, he has 23.5 as the highest, and I kind of believe that. So if he's that, then it puts more pressure on his power, and his power is, I would say, middling. So, put it all together. Oopsie says 95 WRC plus. It's probably enough to keep a job on this team, but if Nick York is blasting it in the minors, Nick York may surpass Nick Gonzalez. Plus, they're looking for a shortstop. Maybe they decide at some point that they just need to see if Nick Gonzalez can handle short at all, and try Nick York and Nick Gonzalez over the middle. It'd be one of the worst double play tandems in the big leagues.
Right. They got Isaiah Kiner-Falefa still there. They could go the glove route with him if they decide that's their best path forward. But I'm with you, Nick York. I mean, I think he should have a pretty big opportunity. 48.3% hard hit rate at AAA. There's power, there's speed, there's a good eye. I mean, what else would you need to see before you give him a chance? Second base, I feel like it's going to revolve the door too.
Than Nick Gonzalez, like by half almost. So, anything that Nick Gonzalez can do, I think Nick York can do better.
Yeah, you mentioned this earlier. The Pirates #1 in bat speed league wide. Really?
Yeah, it's the weirdest thing that happened when I looked at their the team names, and like fourth in blasts, and even the results, 11th in barrel rate, 10th in hard hit, and when it comes to process in terms of chase, 11th in chase and 7th in swing percentage. So they're not aggressive. They don't chase, and they hit the ball really hard, and they swing really hard. I think that second thing is where they really hurt the most. 24th in square up percentage. So whatever they're doing to get that primo bat speed and get those great blast and barrel rates, 4th and 11th, that's not what you expect out of the Pirates at all. What they're doing there is maybe costing them line drives, and that's usually a good trade-off. But you'll see that it's like the opposite of the Cardinals. The Cardinals had middling to bad bat speed, squared everything up, and had bad barrel rates. You do want to do things different than the Cardinals these days, probably. But there's something missing with the Pirates, and that's probably somewhat of the reason that Andy Haynes was let go, because there's some good metrics here, but it's also not turning into runs as you'd expect. So I wonder if a change in the voice at hitting coaching could be good for somebody that we just don't know yet. There's somebody like Brian Hayes or somebody that is going to hear a new voice and go somewhere with it.
Also, I didn't mention this before, but my concerns about the Reds, I think, are pretty well highlighted here, right? They're worst in the division in bat speed, worst in squared up percentage, worst in blast percentage. Like what? Yeah, they don't chase, but they're not doing a lot of damage. And then that ballpark too. It's like, just do it. Like, get some guys that have some bat speed. You can crush in that ballpark.
This is the team with Ellie on it, so he's taking a lot of their swings, and he can't prop everybody up.
No, the pitching side looks great for Pittsburgh. We've talked about them as an organization that's taken some massive steps forward in pitching development. It's not just landing Paul Skeens in the draft, right? Jared Jones, I think, highlights the changes that have taken place in the organization. Bubba Chandler, not far away. Thomas Harrington's a guy you've talked about that you really like. They have quality already, and they have depth in the system coming through. So what do you think the secret is going to be like this year as far as finding solutions in the back? Do they go full youth movement? Do they get more out of someone that's a veteran holdover? Because 1-2, Skeens and Jones, they can go into a series where those two guys start and they could win the series because those guys can both win their starts. It's more like, what do we get from Mitch Keller, and how long are they going to let Bailey Falter and Johan Oviedo be part of the rotation?
Yeah, there's been some sort of noise that maybe Bubba Chandler could take a role in the starting rotation, but Bailey Falter threw 142 innings at 4.43 ERA last year, and is projected by a lot of systems to do about the same again this year. So that's a fifth starter. That's fine. And, teams, he has no options. So, he's a DFA if you don't like him, and teams don't really like to, and he doesn't profile well for the bullpen, right? He throws 90. So, teams don't really like to lose resources. Like they if they think he can be helpful in any way, they'd rather have him on the team than DFA him. So Oviedo was a little bit slightly different situation because he's coming back from elbow injury, and that might open the door for Chandler maybe to start the season. But on the other hand, Oviedo is also kind of more of a mid to back end starter, and he missed all of 2024. So, they could just ramp him up and say, we're not actually even that concerned about how many October innings we get from Johan Oviedo, So we don't need to play around with this. Let's just have him pitch for as long as he can. And we'll maybe Bud Chandler takes over for him. At some point. So I tend to be conservative with innings projections for top prospects where the major league team has 5 credible starting pitchers. They're not going to DFA Bailey Falter just to start Bubba Chandler's clock early.
No, I will say, though, Mike Burrows is kind of a forgotten guy. Had Tommy John surgery. He's not mentioned in the same breath as the top prospects, but he did get back from the injury last year in the second half. So maybe he ends up being a bit of a glue guy in the back of the rotation behind some of the more familiar names that we see on that depth chart. In the closer role, we're hoping for a David Bednar bounce back. We've talked a lot about the pitch tipping problems he was experiencing last year. Didn't lose velo. It seems like he's got the door wide open to be that guy. But if it's not Bednar, is there anyone else in this group of relievers that pops?
I like Colin Holderman actually as the guy behind him. I know that in some places it's listed as Dan Santana, but Colin Holderman throws harder, has better stuff, is better projected by the projection systems I use. And he has a sinker and a cutter, so he's not that susceptible to platoon splits, and he's been a good pitcher in the major leagues, 3.58 ERA in 135 innings. So he has all the boxes. I've been getting some late shares of Colin Holderman as what I think is the setup guy there.
There you go. Different name that we haven't talked a lot about on this show. Let's get the win total projection for the Pirates from PECTOA. 74.8. Too hot, too cold, or just right?
I was blown away by those bat speed numbers. Before the Horwitz injury, I was tempted to say this is at least they're putting better pieces around. I think the kind of depth and secondary pieces are better this year. I'm gonna go too cold.
You're gonna go too cold.
Something here. I think Nick York comes up. They find a way to play Nick York and Nick Gonzalez. I think Andy Rodriguez is going to be the first baseman on opening day, or Henry Davis. I think between Andy Rodriguez and Henry Davis, one of those guys, really recaptures their old form and the excitement that people had about them. Henry Davis is a 1-1. Andy can play anywhere. So there's some stuff that's happening here.
Yeah, I'll say slightly too cold. I think the pitching is really good. I like more of the prospects that could be breaking in sooner rather than later into this group. Maybe there's a little bit of overflow into that bullpen too, where they use some of the guys that could have been starters in the second half as bullpen support as well. Wish they would have done more with their bats this offseason, because when you have guys like Skeens and Jones on club control, what are you waiting for? You get that's your chance. You're not paying top dollar for top end pitching, and just go get literally anything to make your lineup better. And they were so quiet throughout the free agent process. Let's get to our fantasy favorites. Sleeper bat from this NL Central. Who catches your eye?
I had Jordan Walker on there. We did an extensive conversation about him, so I don't need to rehash it. But I think all the at-bats he wants are waiting for him, and he has that top end of bad ball velocity that I like.
Yeah, I'm gonna go homer on this one with Joey Ortiz. Talked a lot about him at the very beginning of the show, but I think you're gonna get a little bit of everything across all 5 categories. I think he'll be good enough to be a steady option even in 12-team leagues as well. That's why he gets the sleeper tag, even though he's someone you've definitely heard of prior to this episode. Surprising that Billy Cook didn't get sleeper bat honors here in the NL Central.
Talk about him. He could be the opening day first baseman.
Billy Cook got mentions in multiple infield previews several weeks ago and did not get a mention during the actual Pirates preview. But yeah, there's opportunity for him to possibly carve out a role. Main reason, a lot of swing and miss, though. That's the thing holding Billy Cook back. That's why they might not let Billy Cook. Too much swing and miss. Sleeper starting pitcher from the NL Central.
Everyone's heard of him, Nestor Cortez. I just like him. I think he's better than people think he is.
just flat out undervalued for you. I'm going to say Ben Brown. I know you mentioned the model not being quite as high on him after the revision, but when I look at guys like Colin Ray and Javier Assad, and I think about what a team really needs to do and wants to do to be a dangerous, like, division winning caliber team, you need
those boring guys with more exciting guys.
Yeah, you need guys like Ben Brown. Like I look at that rotation. I think if they're in a playoff series, wouldn't you rather have Ben Brown starting? At least game 4, but maybe even game 3 over Tyon. Like you're going to face the Dodgers. Let's say you get to the NLCS, you're facing the Dodgers. Who do you want to take the ball first, Jameson Tyon or Ben Brown?
It's probably Ben Brown and give me 2 or 3 innings and we're going bullpen.
Sure. Or yeah, maybe it's one time to the order for each of them. But nevertheless, I just think Ben Brown brings some more swing and miss stuff to that rotation that they're going to desperately need. On the relief pitcher side, who's your sleeper from the NL Central?
Oh man, I think it's Holderman. I'm just struggling to find somebody that I can really put my hands around. Nate Pearson. I mentioned that Porter Hodge is closing over Ryan Presley by the end of the season. It could be Nate Pearson too. So I like the Pearson Hodge selection there, and I think you could in a draft and hold. You might be able to draft Presley, Hodge, and Pearson, and then lock up the Cubs situation without costing too much for you.
Yeah, hopefully you're right if you take 3 swipes at the same bullpen like that. I've seen people try it, and that's option number 4 that actually comes through and gets the save.
I've been doing a lot of 2 swipes at the Phillies with Kerkering and Jose Alvarado.
Yeah, two seems reasonable.
Yeah.
2 definitely seems more reasonable. I'll mention Graham Ashcraft again here. If we're going to get Graham Ashcraft as a reliever, I think that's going to work very well for the Reds and could be a nice surprise if they do, in fact, at some point move on from Alexis Diaz as their closer. Or Alexis Diaz is just the most wobbly, skilled closer in the game again for another year. That could be a possibility as well. But yeah, we ran a little long on the NL Central preview. Eno got carried away talking about the Brewers again. Who'd have thought? Join us in our Discord. We got a whole Brewers channel in there. We got all 30 teams covered. So jump on in that Discord. You can join with the link in the show description. One more reminder to get those Hive Mind rankings in. We'll turn those around here by the end of the week. You can find Eno on Bluesky, enosaris.bsky.social. I am dvr.bsky.social. Thanks to our producer, Brian Smith, for putting this episode together. You got a nice Cardinal way in the background earlier, so I will tip the cap by saying that on our way out the door. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening.